And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'll put you on the spot. What was
Put
your
him on the
worst?
spot.
What was your worst call you ever made? You look back and you say, "Oh, how did I get that one
Oh.
wrong?"
Have you got a couple hours or?
When I stepped on the ice, I never backed down and I never stayed down.
And I was vicious and I was malicious. And I don't care.
He's a freaking madman. Look at him going to town. That'll be a suspension.
Welcome into the Raw Knuckles podcast. Today's special edition, the draft edition, NHL Draft in Montreal. Incredible when we think of the NHL Draft and what it used to be. It used to be in Montreal all the time. This is the 27th time the draft is in the city of Montreal. And God, we couldn't wait for it to get back. It was here, and then COVID came, and it gets canceled. And now, finally, it is back in Montreal. And lo and behold, the Canadiens have the first overall pick. And with us today to discuss this year's NHL draft, Grant McCagg from recruits.ca, www.ca, recruits.ca. Grant does a whole rundown on the NHL draft, lets us know about each and every player, his thoughts on what players are destined to make the NHL, and gives us the lowdown on all the players. Grant, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris.
Listen, good to have you. Listen, you used to scout for the Montreal Canadiens. What years were you with the Habs?
I was with the Habs strictly on a part-time basis between 2008 and 2010. So I did some regional scouting in West Quebec and Eastern Ontario predominantly. I made a few trips to Lake Placid and stuff like that, but mostly just looked at some regional guys and didn't have a lot of input into who they ended up drafting, but I helped out as much as I could.
Well, that's good. So you have a background in drafting NHL players, guys from junior hockey, and uh, looking looking at what you do now with your website, therecruits.ca. Now, what is the purpose of that for you? Do NHL scouts, do other people rely on you for that, or is that more for the average fan of the NHL to kind of check out and see who's going to be drafted and get the lowdown on?
Well, I don't think it's the go-to guide for too many NHL scouts or anything like that. But I always, when I grew up, I loved the Hockey News' draft guide every year, and Bob McKenzie basically started it up. Who everybody I think respects that's in the media world. And what he would do would be interview scouts and get anonymous quotes and try to base it around, put out a draft guide that gave the average fan a pretty good indication of how the draft might go. Um, what I do is, I've said it a few times, is I have, through the years, I got to know a few scouts, and a few of them are good friends. And what I do is I treat them as my staff per se, and me as the head scout. I get all their input, and then I make a list, and it features a lot of their input very heavily because they're the ones seeing these guys live 200 times a year, and I'm not, because just out of financial constraint, I can only get out to so many games, and a lot of them local, and do a pile of video scouting. But between what they tell me, their input, and what I see, I formulate a list and try to, it tries to be close to what the NHL is leaning towards as far as who they'd be picking, and then also some of my own favorites in there, obviously.
Well, that's good. We're going to get into that shortly. And I so rude of me. I didn't introduce you to producer Barry. Barry Reese with Knuckles today. Tim Stapleton has a family commitment, so Barry's going to join us today. And Grant, the draft being in Montreal, which is awesome. And I can't imagine, okay, that there is one team in the NHL, one scout in the NHL that is disappointed that they're coming to Montreal for the draft, right? I mean, this is a place that every player loves to come and play in this building. They love the city, and there's so much excitement around this upcoming draft. And obviously, with the Habs picking first overall, let's get into the picks. There is certainly everybody has their own opinions on who the Habs should draft. I know you've taken a lot of heat on Twitter because of who you think the Habs are going to pick or who they should pick. Now, Shane Wright, they have him at number one. Juraj Slavkovsky at number two. Logan Cooley at number three. So those are the top three. We kind of got to go figure. Who, in your mind, are the Habs gonna take and why?
I don't know who they're going to take, but I certainly prefer Slavkovsky. Uh, Not only do I think he's the best player available, but I think he's the ideal fit for the Canadiens. They've been starving for size in their top six, in my opinion, for this millennium, really, since the '90s, and here's their perfect opportunity to add that. And I also think he has the most upside, and he's very safe. Like at the absolute worst, he's going to be a solid big second line winger, but I think he can end up. He has the potential to be the best forward on the Canadiens, and that's hard to pass on.
Well, it sure is, and a lot of people have Wright at the top there. And I guess why are you looking at Slavkovsky over Shane Wright? Now, Shane Wright, big kid too, big center iceman. The Habs always been kind of small up the middle, and that has hurt them over the years, no question. But here's two big guys, and yeah, Slavkovsky is bigger than Wright, but why not Shane Wright?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the average size of NHL forward is 6'1" plus, and Shane Wright's a 6 foot, 6 foot and a quarter. So I wouldn't call him like a big center. He's still average size center, and they already have an average size center in the top two in Suzuki. So, you got a 1-2 punch of centermen who are average size. Neither of them are above average size. So, I would argue that they're not going to be big down the middle with those two as their 1-2 punch, but they'd be awfully I mean, they'd be set certainly as far as they wouldn't have to go out and get another centerman if they picked right. What's been unfortunately with Wright being the consensus number one, and me having to justify why I don't think he's a consensus number one, I've just spent an inordinate amount of time having to explain that, and it ends up criticizing Wright all the time, and I'd like to stop doing that. I just because I mean I like the player. I think I think he's a great kid. I think he's going to be a very solid NHLer, but I just simply don't consider him to be one of the top three players in this draft class.
Wow, no, not one of the top three. Now, listen, the knock I heard on him, he's a little lazy. He's a little kind of hides in the bushes a little bit. Isn't that prototypical 200-foot player like we see in a Petrus Bergeron, let's say? And you think that's maybe a little bit of immaturity, and if he was to be handled by an NHL coach, that they could get to him and say, "Listen, here's the deal. You want to stay at this level? You want to play at this level? You want to First of all, you want to get to this level? You want to stay at this level? These are the things you have to do. Is he coachable?"
Well, I hope so. And I mean, he had a rookie coach in Kingston who probably didn't want to rock the boat too much. You take over and there's this supposed phenom. you're not gonna, I think he handled him with kid gloves this year, and I'm not certain that was maybe the approach that he should have taken, because I think he needed to, he needed a boot in the butt a couple times this year when he wasn't competing the way you'd like to see him compete. Excuse me. Um, I mean, you're taking a risk, you know. At first, overall, you don't want to have these question marks about competitiveness. Uh, and that's one of the main reasons why I don't have him first, is because there is that question mark. Like, he reminds me very much so of Nolan Patrick in his draft year, and we've seen how that's turned out. He didn't get it, So what if Wright? What if it's the same with Wright? What if he underachieves? And I mean, there is certainly that question, and that's probably the largest reason why I don't have him in the top three.
Okay, so looking at the Habs having that first pick overall, and the pressure that comes with playing in Montreal, and comes with the position of being the general manager. Last time Habs had the first pick overall, we can look back, and God rest his soul, Doug Wickenheiser, who I absolutely loved, was a dear friend. We look back at it, they made a mistake. Thinking here was Doug, a big centerman. Okay, they were thinking Jean Beliveau, the next Jean Beliveau. Doug dominated junior. He was bigger than, like, rather large man for a center iceman in junior, and he just dominated. When he got to the NHL, well, boy, everybody else was big now, and it was a struggle on him. There was a lot of pressure here. He didn't play right away, and then he got in the lineup, and things didn't go his way, and it was a difficult, believe me, it was so difficult and painful to watch some of the stuff he went through here. Denny Savard, good Shanu, ends up going to Chicago, and we know what happened there. So with that, all that pressure, I guess, on this general manager, a rookie GM, by the way, in Kent Hughes, but he's coupled with a guy who's shown that he's pretty keen and sharp when it comes to drafting players. We look what he did in Boston, Gorton, and we look what he did in New York. He's done one hell of a job, and I'm looking for that to continue. And do you think you're thinking they're going to pick your edge? Do you think Gorton is going to pick him and Hughes? Gorton and Hughes. I say Gorton and Hughes because obviously the two of them are working together.
Well, it's funny you asked that. I'm just I just wrote an article that I'm going to be publishing this afternoon. Going into detail on that, and it. I think that there's pressure to take Wright, because after what happened last year at the draft with them taking Mayu, and it ended up being so controversial. And I mean, it's quite obvious that the majority of fans, as I'm told in every in every tweet,
as they're ripping you up and down on Twitter,
that that they definitely, oh no, we're right. So I mean, do they want 18,000 fans to be booing? Like, do they? I keep picturing you remember the girl when the
the lady, but Kokiemi?
Yeah. So are we going to see like 10,000, 10,000 of those faces,
like, being shocked, shocked that they didn't pick right.
Yeah, with the Zadina lady look on their face, if Slavkovsky goes first overall. So I mean, I understand that there's some pressures there, and I mean, my sources have indicated that they prefer Slavkovsky, but that maybe the boss wants them to take Wright, and the boss is usually the one that ends up getting the final say.
His way. When you say the boss, do you say Gorton or do you say Molson?
I think Jeff, at the top.
God, I hope they don't go on Jeff's suggestion. I hope they go on Gorton's. I hope they, and I'm sure in hiring these two guys that, man, you got to put your faith and trust in them and that they're picking the right guy. I happen to think Gorton and Hughes together are going to make the right move. And I hope it's this kid, because, listen, 6'4", 225, that's what he's listed at. He's still growing. The kid has magic hands, right? He can stick handle on the phone booth. You don't get that in big men, right? You don't get that in big men. What is? How about the character of this kid? All right, we know he's got the talent, skating. How about his character?
Well, I don't know that there's a better authority on that than Craig Ramsey, who we all, I'm sure you respect just as much as I do. And, he talked about, I mean, he played him more than any other player at the World Championships, an 18-year-old kid. You had him out on the penalty kill. He played him in, protecting leads, first power play, the whole works. And he could do nothing but sing his praises about how nice a kid he is, always laughing, always smiling, a real team player. There are no marks against either of them as far as character goes. I can say the same thing about Wright. He's a great kid too, which has made it difficult to be having to be so critical of him to justify why I don't have him first overall. It's one of the unfortunate parts of the business.
Yeah. Go ahead, Beth.
Is that Slavkovsky guy kind of like Yager? I mean, when you guys are talking, he kind of reminds me of Yager. He's big. He's got great hands. He's from Czechoslovakia, isn't he? He's kind of reminds me.
Well, Slovakia, but
Okay.
yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, you'd hate to put that pressure on the kid. I've referred to him as a kind of the poor man's Jagger, maybe, that type. Obviously, you can't say he's going to be the next Jagger because Jagger, one of the top 5 point producers of all time, and Slavkovsky's probably not going to be that. But yeah, that the physical package. His puck protection skills at that age against men just blows me away. Like when he's 23, I don't know how you're going to get the puck off him. He's going to, how Armia, when he's at his best on the cycle.
Yeah, when he's at his best. Yep.
It's like that all the time with this kid, but even better. Plus he's got vision, better shot than Armia, obviously, and better hands. So, I mean, that to me is the ideal guy for Caulfield and Suzuki. You plug him in there, and you've got, they tried every winger on the team, I believe, like Pitlick, you name it, go down the list. They tried with those two guys this year, and none really clicked. I mean, Anderson ended up being the preferred choice, but you can't say that Anderson's a good playmaker or has good vision or good hands. That's not his game. But in a first line role, I think you need somebody with first line skill. And Slavkovsky's got that, plus the size, which is exactly what they need, I believe.
Who's Wright? Who does Wright resemble? Give me a player that plays today that I can say Wright's like.
Okay, well, I was going to say one that Knuckles would know, Pierre LaRouche. Yeah, going back 40 years. Well, really? I mean, that just away from the puck,
Away,
but so skilled.
You. No, I have you.
Opportunistic,
Yeah.
Likes to kind of, needs to be introduced to his goalie at the end of some games, Yeah. I mean, I talked to Reggie Houle last fall, and he was telling me about, how he just wouldn't come back to support his defenseman, and that's why Scotty, he sat in the stands for a couple of playoff Stanley Cup runs when he was a 50-goal scorer before that. But, I mean, with Scotty Wright, they won 2 more cups. And then the year that he became the first-line center with the Habs, they lost to Minnesota in 6 games, and the four cups were over,
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, okay.
I was in the stands. It wasn't okay. Al McAdams scored. It was Game 7, right?
I thought it was 6. Sorry. Okay.
I thought it was Game 7. But anyway, okay. I know one thing: we lost, and that was my first year pro. And I think I played 2 playoff games in Minnesota that year. So that was my first taste of NHL playoffs.
Most importantly, Grant, how would you have scouted Chris?
Well, I mean, at the time, I'd have said needs to work on his skill and his skating, and he did. I mean, the improvements that I saw in Knuckles' game from, his first pro camp to. Did you ever play in Ottawa exhibition game against Chicago, Knuckles? Do you recall
honestly,
that?
I can't remember.
Okay, because there used to be exhibition games every year in Ottawa.
I know I played up there. I don't know if it was Chicago. I know we played an exhibition game there.
Well, and it was always Chicago, and then you would have played. I remember the first time setting my eyes on Rod Langway, and I thought, holy geez, here's Larry Robinson. Like he looked, he had the mutton chops and like the whole look, no helmet, the fuzzy hair, and just the same size. I thought, oh my goodness, this kid, I honestly can't say I said the same thing when I first saw, I wasn't blown away when I first, the first time I saw you play, but I
don't blame you.
Yeah.
I don't blame you.
Hey, listen, did you write down not tough enough?
No, I got that part right.
Here's the deal. I'm going to end it here on Knuckles, and we'll get back into what we're here to talk about, the NHL draft. I was drafted as a favor in the 17th round by Dickie Moore and Doug Harvey. My coach as a young guy was Judge Paul King. Judge King was a friend of Dickie Moore, and he was a friend of Doug Harvey, very close friends. And the judge asked them to do him a favor and draft me. That's how I get drafted. I wasn't found. They sent somebody down to look at me at Northeastern, no question. I think it was Richard Scammell at the time. And anyway, I was picked 231 out of 235. I mean, come on, that's a favor. It's not like all of a sudden they said, oh, we got this kid at Northeastern we're looking at. No, it was a favor. So thank you, Judge, and thank you, Dickie and Doug. Enough about Knuckles.
Well, thankfully,
so we get into the first.
Hey, Chris, the one thing you have to cover, just as a favor for me, I'm from Pittsburgh, so I brought up Yager. How about Logan Coley? I mean, is he out?
Yeah, we're gonna get there, Bat. Okay. We're getting there.
All right.
The top three, right? You're thinking Shane Wright, Savlosky. Is Cooley in that top three?
Right. Well, my top three doesn't have Wright. I think I mentioned that already. I've got Noah Ostlund. I've got Noah Ostlund in there, and I know you're planning on asking me who I think is the dark horse or whatever that could end up being the best. That's kind of underrated a bit, and that's the kid for me. I just love this kid. He wears number 11, and he reminds me a heck of a lot of an undersized center that used to wear number 11 for the Canadiens. I don't know if you know who I'd be speaking of, but he also wore a C. So Saku Koivu, obviously. Just a very, very, he reminds me in so many ways of Koivu. And I do think that the Canadiens wouldn't mind trading up with their second pick to get him if they don't end up.
So where is he rated right now, Ostlund?
Well, I mean, depends on what.
The first one I looked at, they had him, the first one I looked at, they had him in the teens.
Yeah. Well, Bob McKenzie's list is to me is the,
is
the preeminent list other than mine, of course. Because like me, he gets input from NHL scouts. He polls 10 scouts and he just puts, it's basically a poll. And he had him 22, but he was also the biggest riser on his list. Like I think he was in the 50s at the last. And what that usually indicates is, that anybody that's risen that much, you're going to see him, go even higher than. I'd be shocked if he doesn't go in the top 20. I know too many NHL scouts that love the kid, and I was a little surprised that he was still that low on his list, honestly. But scouts can be a little reluctant to really jump a guy up. And I mean, I didn't even have him in the first round at mid-season, to be honest with you. But I got wind that he was improving and playing well. And unfortunately, with video scouting, the team he played for, they got dark sweaters with red numbers. And it was almost impossible to watch this kid, unless you just were paying rapt attention to where he was at all points on the ice because you couldn't read the numbers. So I hadn't really been scouting him that much. But then I saw him at U18 competition where he was great. And then at the U18s, the final U18s, in my mind, in a lot of scouts' minds, he was the best player. Like he outplayed Cooley, he outplayed everyone. The Leclerc, Mackey, Ogren, who are also in the top 10 mix. He was better, and he's a centerman. So I went back and looked at tape, found some games where they wore the white sweaters with blue numbers. I'm on Instat, and I could get every game I can scout. And I went back and I watched about 15 of his games, and he just blew me away. I really think he's the major wild card in this draft. I like him more than Cooley. So
Wow. So Shane Wright out of the top three. If there's a player in that first round that maybe shouldn't be, who do you think that is?
ooh. Well, it's hard to say, Knuckles, because like there's no definitive list, you know. Like I mean, one list will have a guy in the top 30, another won't. So I mean, uh, I like all the top 20 guys that Bob has listed, or any of the top scouting services has listed. I think they're all. I think it's very solid in the top 20, and I don't know that any that I'd say, well, I think he's going to be a miss. I guess the biggest question mark are the two Russians that were so highly touted going into the year. Like, what happens? What happens with these guys? Do they even come over? Nachenko, he's got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So for a lot of people, it was thought that it was either him or Wright that were going to be the best player in this draft class. So then, Ukraine gets invaded. He gets cancer. He doesn't have a great year. Doesn't get invited to the World Junior Team camp even in Russia because his coach Zubov said he was overweight, which I don't know why he would go public with that, but he did. So there's huge question marks concerning him. So maybe it's one of the Russians if they go in the first round that ends up not even playing it in North America. So I guess that'd be my answer.
How about Ivan Fedotov? All right, signed by the Flyers, right? And here's a Russian goalie, 6'7", 205 pounds, right? He was unbelievable in the Olympics, right? 1.16 goals against average, 9.42 save percentage, 4-2 record. Anyway, he signs with the Flyers, and Putin, the bastard, he has him arrested and puts him in the can and saying he's dodging the draft. He's going to end up sending him to Ukraine. Is that nuts? I know it's not about the draft, but you got to wonder, what's that going to do to NHL teams thinking about picking a Russian player now?
Yeah, it's nuts. And yeah, I think it only clouds the situation. One of my real dark horses is a kid that I watched a lot of video on, who is September 9th birthday. So he was barely eligible for last year's draft. He scored 40 goals in Russian junior this year. And I don't know that there's three more skilled players in this draft class. He really blossomed this year, And
all right, get me out of the suspense. Who is it?
Okay, Dmitry Buchelnikov. He reminds me of Buchelnikov. He reminds me a lot of Kaprizov. That type of skill, that size, that kind of player. And of course, Kaprizov was a 5th round pick, so NHL teams would like to have another crack at that. So, but I mean, NHL teams didn't get to scout him. None of the scouts I know saw him live this year. It was all video scouting, and it's the question mark of Russia. I don't even know if he's going to get drafted, but I have him in my top 50 because talent-wise, I think he's right at the top of the draft.
How much, when we look at COVID and what happened, okay, and the league shut down, how much of an impact do you think that has had on the, maybe not, the development of some of these young players who getting drafted this year? You think it sets some of them back and kind of hurt them, or overall? I think this group.
Yeah, I believe so. The way I look at it, especially with the OHL guys, who a lot of them, including Wright, didn't play at all, other than unless they got invited to the U18s, and that was it. I think, personally, I look at it as a good indicator of how hard these kids work in the off season, in the gym and off ice, because what else did they have to do over the year was to work on the off ice stuff in the gym and stuff. I mean, I've heard the excuse made that, well, Wright had last year off, so, but every OHLer was in the same boat, Why would it be an excuse for him, but not for the others? Wyatt Johnson, who got picked 23rd overall, um, he went from 30 points to 120. He didn't play last year at all either. Well, how come he improved so much and Wright didn't? So uh, Mason McTavish, how come he's so much better than he was last year? There's a lot of examples of that. So, in that regard, I think it was a good indicator of just how hard these kids work off the ice, if they improved a lot or if they didn't improve a lot.
What do
All
you?
right, Barry.
Okay.
Barry, I know you have a list of questions. I'm gonna just one more, and
Oh,
then you jump. No, I want you to jump in after this because I know you come up with some good
right.
questions for Grant. Um, and this is my last one, just for now, and I want Barry to jump in. But you look at the Habs having that first overall pick. Do you think that if they could choose, if they could swap, would they swap this year's first pick? And I know there's no guarantees for next year, but wouldn't it be nice if they had it next year with Connor Bedard?
Certainly. Are they? They haven't wrangled the NHL into letting them host the draft again next year, have they? I mean, that would be great, right? Uh, yeah, but Connor Bedard's 5'9" winger. I mean, yeah, he'd be great to have, but is he? Is he the guy that's gonna, if the Habs had him, gonna take him to the promised land in the playoffs? Maybe. I mean, Johnny Gaudreau is a hell of a hockey player. Uh, has he taken Calgary past the first, past two rounds in the playoffs? We saw he had a couple of good games in the playoffs, but he's never. A lot of these 5'9" guys come playoff time, as you know, Knuckles, it gets a little tighter checking. And as great as they are in the regular season, you know, they aren't, you can't name too many 5'9" wingers that have led a team to a cup. Patrick Kane is the exception, I suppose. And, you know, it is, uh, so you don't know. But yeah, I mean, it would be great to have Michkov or Bedard, and maybe they end up in the bottom five again, and maybe they get a crack at them. So um, I know a lot of people that would love to see them get Bedard next year. That's for sure.
Well, I just hope, and I always say the draft is such a crapshoot, right? The top five, you can be pretty sure on guys. Then I just think it gets so you can do your homework, but until that guy gets there, you just don't know. You can educate yourself on the player as much as you can. You can get into his character, his skill, all that stuff. But until he gets there and faces that, starts really facing these men that are pretty seasoned at what they do, that's where you see a kid either stall in his development or just bloom and take off. And I look at a guy like Galchenyuk, and I always say that kid away from the puck, he doesn't have a clue. And I always said that I watched him from the beginning, and I know he had pressure, blah blah blah, all this stuff. But when I watched him in his own end of the rink, he just didn't have a clue what to do or how to defend at all. Hockey sense, I worried about him from the get go, and certainly we've seen he bounced around. Difficult situation for that kid. So, um, anyway, this year's draft, I can't wait. Certainly to see what happens here, and I know my friend Barry, producer Barry, has a few for you.
Well, what do you look at, Grant? What do you look at other than the obvious things, which is skill and size? Is there anything that jumps when you're trying to separate the players you look at? I mean, the things a guy like me won't even think about that you say, "Wow, that separates that guy."
Well, this is probably the hardest thing to judge is their hockey sense. But I think that's so important. You can have an off game, you can be a little tired, maybe run down physically and not be at your best that game. But if you're a really smart player, you're not going to hurt a team out there, no matter how tired you are or run down physically. So to me, uh, if and it's not easy to judge, that's for sure. And you try to do it by multiple views where you can try to discern, just how smart that player is. And I think that separates a lot of really skilled players that are close in skill. But I think you normally see that the guys that are at the top uh, are extremely smart.
Well, how about, is there any player currently playing again? Some guy who really has great hockey sense. You say to yourself, man, that guy, maybe he doesn't have the others, but boy, he's got some hockey sense.
Well, Nick Suzuki, we can go right to Montreal and point to him. Uh, I mean, he's got good skill too. Don't get me wrong, but he to me, he's one of the top five most smartest, one of the five smartest hockey players on the planet.
The one thing you guys didn't cover, and I did mention, I'm from Pittsburgh. So Logan Coley, he's getting a lot of play. I've read a lot about him. His family's a very interesting story with his uncle and everything. But what is the talk on him?
Yeah, well, I pronounce it Cooley, and I think that's
Cooley, did I
probably
say Coley? Yeah,
yeah.
Cooley. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's fine. Um, he Cooley is a terrific prospect. Took me a little while to warm up to him. Uh, Admittedly, I kind of liked Nazar a little better at the start of the year, another centerman with the U.S. team, but the NHL scouts kept assuring me that he was the best prospect, most of them anyway. And the more I watched him, the more I saw that he was more consistent than Nazar. Great skater, certainly one of the top five skaters and one of the top five puck handlers in this draft. At 5'10" and a half, you worry a bit about whether he'll be a first line center, but there may not be any first line centers from this draft, as it turns out. We'll see. But in a normal draft year, uh, you may not have him as a top five pick because of his size. But this year, it's not. I don't see any franchise guys really per se, and it's one of the reasons why, almost by default, that he's top three on a lot of lists.
Is there, I mean, you guys might, when you sit around and just talk to each other, is there any teams that you think just got it right? They just always draft right. I mean, is there any, or is it just a crapshoot to a certain extent? They go wrong, they go right, or whatever.
Yeah, there's no super scout out there. This business, when you're drafting 17, 18-year-olds, it humbles you in a hurry, unless you're not paying any attention. you know uh I mean, Barry Fraser, is a good example. Back with Edmonton, when he drafted Anderson and Messier, and he was thought to be just a genius scout. Well, then they had about a 10-year span where every single one of their top first round picks was a flop, you know? Uh, so was he a genius scout? No, he just got it right sometimes. David Conte, same deal in New Jersey. For the longest time, he's the best scout ever. Look who he got. And then every first round pick, every pick they made for about 8 years was bad. So, you win some, you lose some. It's such an inexact science drafting 17, 18-year-old kids that you know, that I think St. Louis has probably been the best scouting team. I have high respect for Bill Armstrong. Also Tampa, they've done uh, for the most part, a really good job. But again, they've had guys that flopped in the top 10 and top 15. So to me, it's just there's no scouting staff that it is leaps and bounds ahead of the others.
It just, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'll put you on the spot. What was
Put
your
him on the
worst?
spot.
What was your worst call you ever made? You look back and you say, "Oh, how did I get that one
Oh.
wrong?"
Have you got a couple hours, or there's always,
I know everybody's got to make. Just wondering, the one that aggravates
yeah,
you, that just how did I get that
well,
wrong?
I Pedersen. Uh, I had him top five, Elias Pedersen. I had him top 5. I mean, skill wise, midpoint season. I remember watching a game, and he was playing in the Allsvenskan, so the second tier of pro in Sweden, and he was great, dominating. And I said to a couple scouts, "Geez, this guy he could be top 5," and they said, "Yep." Oh, okay, so I moved him into the top 5 of my list. Kept watching him. He was skinny. He was like 160 pounds and almost 6'2", and he got worn out as the season went along, and it really, I really questioned his durability, whether he'd be able to play without getting injured at the NHL level a lot. And as skilled as he was, I thought, maybe this kid isn't going to be durable enough. And I think in that case at least, it was a case of over scouting a bit, overthinking, over scouting. I ended up dropping him to 15 by draft day, and of course, we've seen what he did in Vancouver after he was drafted. I mean, he's not been as great the last 2 years, and he's got some injuries and stuff. So, maybe he's going to have some durability issues, but certainly if I were to do a draft again, I wouldn't rank him 15th. That's for sure. But it's also served as a learning lesson. Like, I mean, I'm always learning and adapting from the draft, where uh, the next skinny kid that maybe wears out a bit at the end of the draft year, don't put all your stock into what he did at the end of the year. Don't forget what he did the first half of the year, And I think Kemmel is a good example in this draft, where he, at one point early in the year, he looked like the top prospect in the draft. And then he got a shoulder injury, and he never played the same the rest of the year. And I found myself dropping a la Pedersen. And finally, at the end of the year, I was, okay, wait a minute here. I saw it, and if you saw it, don't forget it. I saw that this guy could be top 3 player from this draft class. I saw that in the first half of the year. I didn't see it later, but and you tend to go with what you saw at the end. But I ended up moving him back up to the top 6 in the draft class, and I think that's probably where he's going to end up going to.
Okay, I just have 2 more real quick. Who's the highest guy you ever had rated? That was just, since you've been doing it, the guy you said, sure shot, great. There's not even a question. He's number 1. Let's get on with it.
McDavid.
You called that one right.
That's an easy question. That's an easy.
There you go.
I mean, it seems to me a lot, and I'm not like you guys, but a lot of the guys are always highest rated. By the end of the year, people are looking for reasons to downgrade them as the year goes on. They start doubting it. And I said to Chris beforehand, I remember when Tavares was always rated high, and at the end of the year, people were just knocking them, trying to find what was wrong with them.
Yeah. No, that's true.
So, and my other one, and I kind of forget. Jeez, I'm getting old.
Yeah.
Let's see.
We're gonna have to find a new producer.
Yeah, you better.
well, Knuckles had a chat with me and had mentioned that you were going to ask me about a player that I had ranked really high that didn't end up going high, but ended up being a really good pick. I do believe. Well, there's been a few of those too, so it goes both ways. But thankfully, I always think of Erik Karlsson. And that was one of my first drafts that where I was scouting. I was with McKean's at the time, and in those days, the scouts like me didn't get to see a lot of video on these guys. I'd heard whispers, and there were 2 Erik Karlssons in the draft. And it's funny. I remember, I got kind of word from a scout that there was this up and coming Erik Karlsson kid. And I remember I talked to a scout and I asked him, what do you think of Erik Karlsson? And real dead silence, because, oh, geez, he discovered this kid, because the NHL scouts were onto him. He ended up being ranked 71st overall by the Hockey News. And, but thankfully we got to see the under 18 tournament at the end of the year. And he blew me away, like, with his skill. and I ended up ranking him top 10 with McKean's. We were the only publication that had him in the top 20, and we went all the way and we put him as a top 10 guy and said, the skill, you can't pass on that skill, and the vision and the smarts. And of course, he ended up getting picked by Ottawa 15th overall. Anaheim loved him, and they were going to pick him at 15. And Brian Burke was the GM, and he told the staff, "Well, I'm not drafting a 160-pound Swedish defenseman. I'm moving back." And he dropped down 3 spots or 2 spots and took Jake Gardner, and Ottawa moved up and took Erik Karlsson. And I think Berkey would have liked to have had that one back if he could have.
For sure. And certainly he ain't the first guy who made a mistake in the
draft.
Of
course not.
Sure.
No.
No question. But
it was interesting that there's an example of GM overruling the scouting staff.
Yeah.
And, and
very strong-willed GM too.
True. But I mean, they're the guys that are
my friend, by the way.
They're the guys that are out watching these guys every, 200 times a year. And I mean, that's what they're there for, right? I understand the thinking that 160-pound Swedish defenseman, but they loved him. They had him ranked first. And if he'd have listened to them, it probably would have turned out even better,
Grant, my last question. Okay, you scout. You must love what you do. What does it feel like when you see a player that you discovered that no one has him very high rated, and you see him and you go, "This kid's got it"? I mean, what's the feeling? I mean, do you feel like you discovered something, like you can't wait to tell people? I just wonder emotionally, because you see a lot of kids that I'm sure other people know about, but you have to come across some kids when you're scouting other kids. You go, "God, that kid's really good. No one's talking about him."
Pavel Datsyuk, perfect example, right?
Really?
Yeah. Yes. Well, that happened with Buchelnikov this year. I contacted all of my scouting friends. Have you seen this guy? What do you? No, don't know who you're talking about. Never saw him. We don't have him on our list. And it's okay. Well, I mean, you should, as far as I'm concerned. But they can't get over there. They're reluctant to. Their European guys are there, and they do the scouting over there, so they don't rock the boat on that. If they don't like a guy, they're not. It's not like they can say, "Well, I watched a video, and you should have him." It's up to the European scouts to rank those guys. So, yeah, certainly, it has been the case with several Europeans through the years. Kuznetsov's another one. I had him top 10. He was. If it had been up to me in 2010, but I was low man on the totem pole with Montreal. I'd have picked Kuznetsov with their first pick, but they ended up taking Tenorti, who at the time they thought they needed the size, and they probably did, but he didn't work out. And, it's the way it goes.
And that's another thing. Drafting by need, what do you think of that, by the way? Drafting, is there a time to draft by need? And should you stay away from that at all costs when you really come down to it? Do you take the talent over the need?
Certainly with the first pick, I think you have to go BPA, because you're drafting ideally for 3 to 5 years down the road, and your roster could be completely different than it was. It's funny. I've looked back. Oh, well, they should have taken the defenseman. You look back at old drafts, and then 3 or 4 years later, they were loaded with defensemen. It wouldn't have mattered. You just you're drafting for the future, and you don't know what the roster is going to look like in the future. It's not like the NFL draft where they plug in these 22-year-olds, that have played 4 years college, and they're playing the next year and they're helping you. So you draft by need. It's you go with the talent. I agree 100%, Knuckles.
All right, just a couple more. Slavkovsky. How do you say his name? Juraj Slavkovsky?
That's a really good question.
Yeah. Okay.
Jerry. They'll probably end up calling him Jerry. I wouldn't doubt it. I think it's Uri.
Slappy. And his nickname in the NHL will be Slaffy.
Yes.
They're going to call him Slaffy. You know that. And I got to tell you, I finally got Kotkaniemi That was a tough name at the beginning. Kotkaniemi. Christ, you heard it enough to finally get it down. And God, did he
KK.
ever hit the jackpot leaving here? Right? Thank you, Bergie. You gotta wonder. And listen, the Finns have really their program. They've developed some very good players. Where it was always the Swedes, Swedes, and the Finns have really they've come on as a nation that puts out some damn good hockey players.
Oh, definitely. You gotta love their personality, their character. They're hardworking. You're getting a hardworking, solid character kid as a rule when you draft a Finn.
Lehkonen. I mean, look at Lehkonen, what he did. 18 goals as a rookie, right? Everybody thought he was going to be a goal scorer and this and that. This kid is a complete player. And you talked about Pedersen and Carlson. Some of the guys, smaller side, you need these guys to win. But here we are talking about Slappy. And Slappy is this big man who is going to be able to be one of those guys, be standing at the end when it's time to hoist that Stanley Cup. And you have a few of those smaller players, talented players, Caulfield, and you're able to insulate them. That's the ticket. And the more I think of what you're saying here about Slappy, man, I hope the Habs do take him. That size, that ability he has, and you see Suzuki and him 1-2. And why have you? Suzuki, as talented as he is, the hockey sense, and he great hockey sense. Is he a true number one?
I think if you play him with true number one wingers, yes.
Yeah.
Like is Bergeron a true number one offensively? Well, when you put him with Marchand and Pasternak, he is.
Yeah.
I mean, if he'd have been playing with Josh Anderson and Jonathan Drouin, your favorite there, Knuckles, the past few years, would he have been putting up 80
I got to be
points?
careful with that. I don't want to. Oh my God! It's like.
Yeah, I
God
do
bless
believe...
the kid. I don't know. I want to see the talent. He's so talented.
I know.
And you got that little, just more drive from him night in and night out. And it's frustrating. And I know I let it get to me. I know, he's a great kid, I'm sure. But out in that ice, it's so demanding to play in the NHL. And sometimes the thing I question about is his commitment to his teammates and himself to be the best he can be every night. That's all it is with me. And it's frustrating. And listen, I don't expect every player to be able to play them 82 games. And I always went on the Lemaire thing. He asked me one time, he said, "How do you think you played tonight?" I said, "I thought it was okay." He said, "Chris, you were terrible tonight." And I was like, my pride's hurt and my ego. I'm like, oh. And he said, "Listen, be honest with yourself about the way you play. It's the only way you're going to be able to improve yourself in your game in the future." And he said, "Here's what I'm going to throw at you right now. You stunk tonight." He said, "I'm going to give you one of those games every 10 games. So that's 8 games a season." And he said, I can see how that can happen. I played the game, I know. But you got to be so driven to want to be good every night, not to let that happen. Because you let it happen once and you let it slip to the next game and the next game and the next thing, you stink for 5 games. He said, you got to really set that goal of, listen, if I have a bad game, it ain't happening for the next 9 again. There's just no way. And I strove to do that every season. After he told me that, I said, I got to try and hit that mark every year. And I think for the most part I did. And when I did suck those nights, you know what I used to do? Go out and drop the gloves and just say, "Listen, let's do it. Let's get this thing on right now, because my legs aren't working tonight, but my fists will." So, it's funny stuff. Listen, Grant, this has been so awesome having you, and I appreciate your time. And if you want to check out Grant's recruiting, his draft guide, you can go to www.recruits.ca. It's so detailed, and he goes in depth on players. And It's really interesting. You take the time to read it. Go to the website. Check out Grant's website. Awesome stuff, Grant. I really, really appreciate you taking the time. We'll have to do this again at some point. Maybe we'll talk this season, midpoint, and see where we got next year's draft coming, 2023, and see just where everybody stands. What do you think, though? The Habs this year, they're not going to stink like they stunk last year, right? They're going to be up in the middle somewhere, wouldn't you think? Closer to the middle of the pack.
Yeah, I think so because they've got good young talent and talent coming too. Like there's 3 or 4 defensemen that are going to push for jobs next year that are going to improve. At least one's going to make the team, probably 2. Gooley's a real deal.
Oh, yeah.
He's just
big boy.
There's no flaws in his game, so he's going to help immensely. And I guess the big question mark is goaltending, right? If Price is out all year, maybe they struggle a little more than I think they will. If he plays, then I don't see them being a bottom 5 team.
Nobody taking Carey Price in a trade, unless say the Habs eat half of it. Do you think someone takes him?
Oh, that's a great question. I guess it all comes down to health, and we don't know exactly what's going on there.
Yeah, it's tough to read, no question. He's pretty secretive about everything, which I get. There's no question, but I hope for him that he's able to come back and play again. I don't know if it's going to be here. I don't know if he even wants to be here. When you look at what they're going through here, the one thing that's missing is the Stanley Cup, right? And I'm sure he'd love to get a piece of that. There's no question about it. But you look at a team like Colorado, how they won the Cup this year. I wasn't too sure about that goaltender, Kemper, after after what I saw in game 2, it was, I think, right? Or when he got hurt and the other kid come in, Frank Coos. I'm like, is that going to happen? So we'll see. And certainly it's going to be interesting to see what happens here in the draft. So again, Grant, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Knuckles.
Thank you. Thanks, Grant. Nice meeting you.
All right, Grant.